If you ever chat with someone who speaks Spanish and ask them, which book is a must-read in their language? The answer will likely be Don Quixote of La Mancha by Miguel de Cervantes. Don Quixote is one of the greatest treasures of Spanish literature. Known as a cornerstone of modern storytelling, this novel brings to life a character who realizes he's part of a book. The second part of this iconic book is especially significant because it marks the start of what we now call modern literature. What's so special about it? It's the first time a character in a story knows he's being written about. Now we know it's a long read at 738 pages, so we're saving you some time. I'm going to summarize this masterpiece in just a few minutes. But before that, you should really tell us in the comments what should we review next. Alright, let's get started. We begin our story in the quiet village of La Mancha, Spain, where a man of 50 who belongs to the lower ranks of Spanish nobility, Alonso Quijano, lives. Alonso is a big fan of books about knights, chivalry, princesses, and all sorts of magical tales. He reads so many of these stories that soon he can't tell where the stories end and real life begins. Basically goes completely bonkers. In this way, he's convinced to be a knight from one of his books. So what does he do next? Well, he decides it's time to live out his knight dreams. First, he digs out some rusty old armor and gets his hands on an aged horse from the stable, which he proudly names Rocinante. Feeling that every good knight must have a lady to defend and adore, he thinks of Aldonza Lorenzo, a local girl he once fancied. In his mind, she becomes the beautiful Lady Dulcinea de Toboso, and for himself, he picks the name Don Quixote, inspired by the legendary knight Lancelot from his books. With his new identity and mission in mind, Don Quixote is ready to embark on his adventures across the plains of Spain. Next on our journey, we follow this newly minted knight as he dons a rather amusing getup and sets out to perform heroic deeds. But as he blurs the lines between reality and fantasy, things are bound to get a bit mixed up. Let's see how his grand adventures take a few unexpected turns. Clad in a bizarre assortment of armor, the self-declared knight Don Quixote leaves his home, ready to tackle any challenge in the name of chivalry. His first stop? An ordinary inn, which through his eyes is a magnificent castle. He marches up to the innkeeper and, with great ceremony, insists on being knighted. The innkeeper plays along, dubbing Don Quixote a knight just to amuse himself, but Don Quixote's adventures quickly spiral into chaos. He spots a young shepherd being punished by his master and leaps to the rescue, only to find himself tangled in a misunderstanding. His day doesn't get any better when he crosses paths with a group of merchants. Convinced they're dishonoring his beloved Lady Dulcinea, he charges at them, only to be soundly thrashed and left bruised by the roadside. Thankfully, a kind peasant finds him and brings him back home to recover. Despite the severe beating, Don Quixote remains unfazed and devises an even more ambitious plan. He convinces his neighbor, Sancho Panza, a down-to-earth but somewhat simple fellow, to join him as his squire. With promises of wealth, fame, and the rule of an island, Sancho is swept up in excitement. Together, under the cover of early morning, they slip away from the village. Thus begins the duo's legendary string of adventures, filled with wild dreams and the pursuit of grand exploits. As Don Quixote and Sancho travel across the countryside, they come across a field of windmills. To Don Quixote, of course, these aren't just windmills. They're fearsome giants. Without a second thought, he charges at them, only to find out the hard way that they're indeed just windmills when he gets knocked to the ground. But still, the misadventures don't stop there. The pair faces one wild situation after another. Imagine Don Quixote squaring off against a flock of innocent sheep, convinced they're a threatening army. And there's Rocinante, because he didn't want to feel left out, who decides to chase after some mares, causing quite a stir. The adventures grow even more absurd when Don Quixote duels with a man from Biscay, and decides to free a group of inmates who then turn on him. In another comical twist, Don Quixote stumbles upon a barber's basin. In his eyes, this ordinary basin is a magical helmet, and he wears it with pride. Their journey is filled with visits to inns where more misunderstandings lead to a series of laughable events. At one point, Don Quixote chooses to live in a mountaintop to demonstrate his devotion and win over his beloved. Though entirely imaginary, Lady Dulcinea, concerned for his well-being, his two best friends, a priest and a barber, come up with a clever plan. They trick him into a cage and transport him back home, hoping to snap him out of his fantastical world. Throughout these adventures, Don Quixote and Sancho meet a colorful cast of characters: innkeepers, pirate captives, women of ill repute, goatherds, soldiers, priests, escaped convicts, and heartbroken lovers. Each encounter adds a layer of humor and humanity to their epic tale. 10 years after their initial escapades, Don Quixote and his loyal squire Sancho set off on yet another adventure. This new chapter brings a different flavor as Don Quixote, treated with greater respect by the author, finds some success in his quests. He becomes a thinker, reflecting more on his actions, which gives him a deeper, more introspective character. Sancho, surprisingly, starts to become the dreamer, flipping roles with his master. In this sequel, an interesting twist unfolds. Everyone they meet has read about their prior adventures. This recognition leads to some tricky situations, as new characters try to exploit Don Quixote and Sancho's fame for their own amusement. For instance, there's a duke and duchess who, upon encountering our famous duo, decide to invite them to their palace. But their hospitality is not without mischief. The duke and duchess concoct elaborate pranks to entertain themselves. They convince Don Quixote that his beloved Dulcinea is cursed by the wizard Merlin and can only be freed through a series of bizarre and challenging tests. Meanwhile, Sancho is tricked into believing that whipping himself will break Dulcinea's spell, a task he undertakes with both hope and hesitation. In a humorous turn of events, the Duke offers Sancho a mock governorship of an island. Sancho, embracing his new role, surprises everyone by ruling wisely and practically, showing that he has more to offer than just comic relief. However, this too is part of the elaborate prank, leading to both humorous and humiliating outcomes. As we follow Don Quixote and Sancho through their new adventures, we see how fame changes their journey, and how they navigate the blend of reality and depiction in a world that's now wise to their antics. As their adventure nears its conclusion, our hero faces his toughest challenge yet, which leads to some unexpected and heart-touching moment. So next, Don Quixote is challenged to a duel by the mysterious Knight of the White Moon. As it turns out, the knight is actually one of Don Quixote's friends, disguised in a costume to bring him home. Before their battle, they agree that if Don Quixote loses, he must give up his knightly quests for a whole year. Unfortunately for our hero, he is defeated and agrees to lay down his arms, marking the beginning of his journey back home. As Don Quixote returns to the countryside to live a quieter life, he falls seriously ill. During this time, something extraordinary happens. He regains his full sanity. Brother fell ill and decided to lock in. The man who once roamed the lands as the valiant Don Quixote comes to see the world as it truly is. Despite Sancho's best efforts to rekindle his master's belief in their fantastical adventures, Don Quixote decides to embrace his true self. Alonso Quijano once again. In his final days, Alonso reflects on his past as Don Quixote. With a clear mind, he expresses his regrets for the confusion and trouble his adventures may have caused. He makes amends, apologizing to those he has wronged. And so in the end, the man known as Don Quixote passes away, leaving behind a legacy of wild escapades and a story that captivates the hearts of all who hear it. And that brings us to the end of the incredible journey of Don Quixote. From valiant knight to a wise man returning to his roots, we've seen it all. Thank you so much for taking some time to watch this video. If you enjoyed the twists and turns of Don Quixote's world, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more stories and adventures waiting just for you, and you won't want to miss what's coming up next. Until next time, cheers!